This is the first chapter of Efren Divided by Ernesto Cisneros. Once again, Efren Nava woke up to chubby pajamaed foot in his face. He squinted at the bright yellow rays peeking in through the broken window blinds and looked to his left. But it wasn't Mia's foot. She was fast asleep, cuddled at the edge of the mattress with the same naked plush doll whose clothes she'd taken off and lost a long time ago. He'd looked to his right. Sure enough, the foot belonged to Max. How Max managed to roll over Efren during the middle of the night was beyond him. Efren shook his head and sighed, but then he caught sight of a tiny hole on the right foot of his little brother's flannel onesie. Smiling, Efren licked the tip of his pinky and gave a wet willy to Max's pudgy toe. Efren covered his mouth and stifled his laughter as the sleeping Max pulled away his leg. However, the victory didn't last long. Max spun around in his sleep and planted his other foot in Efren's face. There was no way to win. Efren yawned himself fully awake before turning to his parents' side of the room. Once again, Pa was gone. No sign of his heavy jacket or scuffed-up work boots by the front door either. It seemed no matter how early Efren tried getting up, he just couldn't catch Pa getting ready for work. Ma was the same way, and she never slept in. Any minute now she'd wake up, unwrap her blankets, and go right to the kitchen to make breakfast. There was a pot full of leftover frijoles from last night's dinner, and that meant she would be for sure making fresh sopas this morning, Efren's favorite. But before that, Efren had something important to do. He lifted Max's leg by the pajamas and got up, careful not to disturb Max, who now snuggled close to Max. Efren stepped over the pair of pint-sized legs and arms blocking his path. He wasn't sure which was worse, sharing a mattress with two kindergartners or sharing the bathroom. The apartment was really only one big room, so the only place he could find peace and quiet was the bathroom. Efren looked in the mirror, wincing as he removed the tiny strips of tape pinning his ears back against the sides of his head, an idea he came up with after repeatedly hearing Ma warn the little ones against making funny faces. Sus caras se las van a quedar así, she'd say. Their faces freezing. That's exactly what Efren counted on. It was only a theory, but if it were even slightly true, he guessed the same would apply to his ears. If he could manage to tape back his ears often enough, they too would eventually freeze and finally stop sticking out. All he had to do was make sure they folded in just the right way for a few more weeks, and presto! Normal ears that didn't stick out like the knobs on Frankenstein's neck. After taking care of business, Efren climbed inside the empty bathtub with a library copy of There's a Boy in the Girls' Bathroom by one of his favorite authors, Louis Sachar. Efren loved reading books, even when he'd read them before. It was like visiting an old friend. The main character, Bradley Talkers, was the best. And it wasn't just that he had a really sweet side to him, and that his classmates didn't get to see. Nope. The boy was super tough, and no matter how rough things got for him, he continued to show up and fight. Like Efren's best friend David, another misunderstood kid. Some kids at school only saw this white kid who liked to dress flashy and flaunt his latest pieces of jewelry. But Efren knew the real David, the same boy who once took off the sweatshirt he was wearing and donated it for a clothing drive in the neighborhood. Normally, Efren would lie in the tub reading and laughing until a stampede of feet came running towards the door. But this morning, his eyelids were extra heavy and the need for sleep was too powerful. He couldn't fight it, not after staying up so late waiting for Ma to return from working overtime hours at the factory. For the last couple of weeks, there'd been a whole lot of talk, a whole lot of chisme, especially around the laundromat, about various raids and stop points happening around town. Efren tried not thinking about what he'd seen on the news, all the stories about families being separated, kids put in cages, but that was easier said than done. Efren couldn't help but worry. Despite numerous lectures from Ma and repeated threats of being on the receiving end of her chancla, he stayed up really late until she got home. He'd done the best he could to piece together the information he heard, but it wasn't easy. It seemed like any time he caught adults talking about it, someone in the room would nod towards him and the topic would shift to something else, usually the final minutes of the previous night's telenovela. After an unplanned nap in the tub, Efren heard rattling in the kitchen and headed over. By the stove stood Ma wearing a fuzzy blue robe that, according to Max, made her look like the Cookie Monster. Efren stood and admired how easily Ma formed perfect little saucers from the doughy masa de maíz, then pinched the steaming edges to form a tiny wall to keep the beans from seeping off. Her hands were tough and hummingbird fast as she tested the griddle's temperature by testing it with her bare fingers. How did she manage not to burn herself? Efren wondered. Ma's sopes were delicious, and even though they weren't much more than a thick corn tortilla topped with beans and fresh ranchero cheese, Efren didn't think of them as a poor person's meal. To him, to Max, to Mia, they were a special treat. Just one of the many milagros Ma performed on a daily basis. Something super. Super sopes! Supers! That made Ma superwoman. Efren laughed to himself. The word fit her perfectly. Before long, Max and Mia were up and climbed onto their usual seats at the table. Sopes! They turned to each other and sang out in a song. Frijoles, de las comidas más ricas, los más que comes, lo más que petes. Efren shook his head. You guys should be practicing your English. My 5th grade teacher, Mrs. O'Neill, used to say that's the only way to master the language. Aquí están. Ama set the breakfast spread on the kitchen table, her exhausted eyes creasing as she smiled. Mijo, most of the world speaks more than one language, and Spanish is a part of who we are. She moved towards Efren and then ruffled his hair. You'll understand when you're older. Max and Mia reached in first, each picking up a bean and cheese topped sope. Efren eyed the last one while Ama filled the glasses with chilled orange juice. Ama, where's yours? Ay, amor, a cup of cafecito is all I need. Efren's stomach grumbled, but it was his heart giving the orders. Ama, why don't you take mine? I can have breakfast at school anyway. There's no point letting all that school food go to waste. And have them think I can't provide for my own children? No gracias. Efren inhaled. Ay, Ama, he said, knowing that she was simply being, well, Ama. She pulled out a nopal she'd cut yesterday from the cactus plant peeking over the neighboring fence, and matter-of-factly scraped off the thorns with a knife. Then she held it over the stovetop barehanded. When it was well roasted, she scooped up the remainder of the beans with a wooden spoon and created a sort of cactus taco. See, I'm fine, she said, taking a bite. Being sober woman wasn't just about checking teeth, flattening down calyx, and making sure Max wore only one pair of underwear at a time. It included making sure that everyone wore perfectly creased pants and that any holes made the day before were creatively sewn or patched over. It's one thing to not have a lot of money, Ama reminded them just about every morning. It's another thing to look the part. Of all the things Ama did, this baffled Efren the most. How could a person who sometimes spent 70-plus hours a week locked in a factory behind a steaming iron go anywhere near one at home? Then again, this probably explained her talent for barehandedly flipping tortillas and carrying them to the kitchen table without even a wince. Okay, mijos, time to get ready for school. Everyone knew the drill. Put on the clothes neatly laid out last night by Ama, brush teeth, comb hair, and then grab backpack with lunch inside. Ama was about to hand out well-done kisses when out of nowhere, a helicopter hovered and roared uncomfortably close overhead. Ama waved a fist. Hi! This is the 2nd time in 3 weeks! Unfortunately, sometimes the nighttime activities from the neighborhood carried over into the daytime hours. Home raids, car chases, and suspects at large were all as familiar as paletero trucks selling ice cream bars outside of church. Ama marched to the front door and locked the metal screen. Going into lockdown mode, Max and Mia shut and locked the sliding glass door in the backs of the apartment before Ama could even ask. No one spoke a word, listening for screaming, sirens, or worse, gunfire. Ama peeked through the layered curtains she'd sewn together last year. He was just passing by. Ama had barely unlocked the door before the twins rushed past her and ran outside. Niños, don't run down the stairs! She turned to Efren, who was busy strapping on his backpack. What am I going to do with those two? Adoption? Ama playfully slapped the back of his head before stepping outside. The twins waited by Don Ricardo's food truck, parked at curbside. Can we get some chetos? Efren rolled his eyes. Guys, for the last time, they're called Cheetos. Ama smiled and waved off Don Ricardo, or Don Tapatio, as most of the neighborhood called him because of the huge mustache and sombrero he wore. No gracias, tal vez después de la escuela. Don Ricardo returned the smile and nodded as she steered the twins away by their arms. If you are good, she added. Ama and Efren followed the twins into the kindergarten playground. Even though the school was only a sprint away, Ama never let them go alone, not even Efren, whose middle school was only blocks away. Between the swings and the patch of dirt used for playing marbles, Max and Mia bear-hugged their favorite teacher, Ms. Solomon. She was an older lady dressed in a gray business suit and clashing white sneakers. Eventually, they let go of her and ran off to play in the jungle gym. Ama approached the teacher for a hug herself. Señor Nava, Miss Solomon asked. ¿Cómo está? Excelente, maestra. Excelente. Miss Solomon turned to Efren. And you, señorito, are getting almost too big to hug. Almost. She leaned in and hugged him too. And even with the air inside him being squeezed out, Efren continued to smile. Miss Solomon paused to examine him one more time. I can't believe how big you're getting. Reminds me of how old I'm getting. You're not old, Miss Solomon, Efren answered. You look exactly the same as when you taught me. And of course that made her laugh. Buenos dias, Ama chimed in. And how have my little ones been behaving? Miss Solomon turned and scrunched her lips to one side. Just one tiny problema, she said, following with a short chuckle. Yesterday, Max decided to hide underneath the sink, and Mia would not stop crying until we found him. That was typical Max. Unlike Mia, Max was born with his umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. Sadly, all the minutes Max went without oxygen hurt his brain. It made it hard for him to learn, something he would have to deal with all his life. Amma said it was a milagro that he survived it all. Efren couldn't help but wonder what Max would have been like had the doctors caught the problem in time. Yeah, it's amazing how much Mia worries about him. I think it's super sweet. Suddenly, Miss Solomon's face lit up. Oh, before I forget, I already submitted your name for this year's Christmas gift baskets. I know it's still November, but I wanted to make sure that you were included, especially after all the help you gave me putting together the costumes for last month's play. Gracias, maestra, said Amma, but we already got our turn. It's best if somebody else got it this year. Miss Solomon pressed her lips together. Oh, all right, she said, but I do have a favor to ask. Miss Solomon, after everything that you have done for my children, no favor is too big. Consider it done. Well, she leaned in closer to Amma. I have a date. He's really cute, she said, giddy with excitement. Efren made a face and turned towards the playground. And he's a doctor, she added. I promised to cook dinner for him, and I was hoping to get the recipe for that fabulous mole you make. Amma turned to Efren. Efren, mijo, you've been asking me for weeks now. How would you feel about walking to school by yourself? Solo? He asked. Solito, she added. Efren fist pumped the air and shuffled his feet in a celebratory dance. Can I go home and pick up my bike? Only if you take your helmet. He scowled at the thought of showing up to school wearing the turtle-shaped helmet Amma bought him from the swap meet. No, thanks. I'll walk instead. With that, Efren darted past the portable classroom by the kindergarten side of campus and onto Highland Street. He passed Doña Chana's lime-colored duplex and paused to look at her guayaba tree where he scanned the branches. Guayabas were his favorite, but it wasn't the kind of fruit he could picture any of his teachers eating. He figured teachers wouldn't accept anything coming from grubby kid hands unless it came with a thick peel. Guayabas were definitely out. That was the thing about Highland Street. Some people just saw the worn apartments and graffiti-tagged walls, but it offered good things too, like the fruit trees as far as the eye could see. According to Amma, it had to do with people her age being used to growing their own food. That was one of the beautiful things about walking this street. Even though people on the block didn't have much, everyone still shared and looked out for each other. Efren strolled a bit further, stopping at the apartment complex sandwiched at the middle of the block. Up high in an avocado tree, a litter of black kittens competed for his attention. Hey kitties! You guys might be cute, but I'm allergic to you. Only the kittens didn't pay any attention to what he said and continued looking down at him and purring in their kitty language. No, it's not going to work. I have to get going or I'm going to be late for school, so stop it. I don't care how cute you guys are. A few minutes later, Efren found himself with red, itchy eyes, sitting up in the branches with two kitties nestled on his lap. That's when a familiar whistle caught his attention. Efren looked down. Sure enough, it was David on his bike. Even though he was the only white kid living on this block, it wasn't his skin color that made him stand out. It was his hip-hop style. Kids on the block called him El Periquito Blanco because of the bright colors and baggy, oversized clothes he wore. That and his parrot-like nose. It had been this way since he moved into the neighborhood. Efren carefully handed off the kittens to David and climbed on down. What you doing up there? Asked David, kneading the kittens' baths. I was going to take some avocados to my teachers, but they're still kind of hard. They look like grenades. You ever hold a real grenade? Efren scratched the tip of his nose. Not a real one. You? Nope. David pointed to his ears. How about real diamonds, though? Efren leaned in for a better look. Man, he exclaimed. Sweet earrings. David smiled, showing off his new fake diamond stud earrings large enough to cover his entire earlobes. Yeah, and they're real, too. Efren leaned in even closer. Real fake, you mean? David crumpled his forehead. No way, not these. Don Tapatio wouldn't have charged me $10 for them if they were fake. He pointed at his ear. Puro bling bling, he said with a grin. Well, they're way cool. I know, right? David surveyed the street. Dude, where's your mom? Efren shrugged. Oh, I finally complained. Told her that I'm getting too old to be walked to the school. David scoffed. Yeah, right. You probably begged her, huh? Yeah, pretty much. Hey, want a ride? Sure. Efren jumped onto the handlebars and held on tight. Initially, the bike swayed back and forth, but it eventually straightened as David made it onto the side of the street. You sure you can handle my weight? Efren asked. Of course. I gave Concha a ride the other day, and she's not all bony like you. Efren laughed. Yep, David continued. She barely squeezed between the handlebars. Ama would have had a cow if she'd known they'd been riding together like that. As much as she liked David, she didn't quite understand him. Said she couldn't get why a boy would dye his hair different colors each month, or why he insisted on sagging his pants so low that she always knew the exact pattern of his boxer shorts. Once, she even threatened to throw away all of Efren's underwear if he ever tried something like that. And even though she was smiling when she said it, Efren knew better than to risk it. Today, though, Efren felt like a real-life celebrity strutting his stuff down the red carpet. He sat upright, waving at all the elementary school kids, still being escorted by their overly protective mothers. That's right, world. Eat your heart out. For once, he knew what it was like to be independent, like David. And all the time Efren had known David, he'd never seen anyone calling him inside when it got too late. Never saw anyone come out to the playground to see if he needed a sweater or hassle him for not keeping his shirt tucked all the way into his pants. When the duo reached the school, David stopped at the bike rack where the school security guard, Rabbit, was standing. At least that's what the kids called him. They thought it was a clever name for the old man who was so slow that a tortoise could outrace him. Efren hopped off the bike and untucked his shirt. So, what's up with you? You usually get here right before the late bell. Simple. You are looking at this year's new ASB. ASB? Associate something. I don't know. Point is, I'm going to run for school president. I know I'm only a 7th grader, but so is Jennifer Huerta, and she's the only other person running. She's such a teacher's pet, there's no way I'm going to lose to her. You do know that's a bunch of extra work, right? I know. But the way I figure, once I win, I can pass a new rule for the vice president to have to do all that stuff. Efren crinkled his forehead. Dude, I don't think that's how it works. Of course not. That's why I'm running, to fix it. You know what? You should run too. But then I'd have to do all your work. Or you could be treasurer. He slid his fingers over his palm as if peeling a potato. It's gonna rain money for sure. And you'll be in charge of it all. Dude, we're talking millions. Efren shook his head. I don't know about that. Besides, I'm not really into politics. Forget politics. I'm talking instant popularity. By next year, we'll both have our pick of the girls. So that's what this is about. David went all puppy-eyed, a look Efren had seen plenty of times. Nah, no thanks. Fine, said David, but will you at least go with me to the candidates meeting? Efren knew all too well how horribly wrong most of David's plans usually went. Still, he couldn't say no to his best friend. All right, but you owe me. Duh, dude, that's how politics works. And that is the first chapter of Efren Divided.